Israel is striking back after the Islamic group Hamas launched rockets deep into the Jewish state as far as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
That's right. Israel wants to stop the attacks and promises that Hamas can no longer hold it hostage with its rockets. Chris Mitchell has the story from Israel.
Israelis in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem ran for shelter as sirens warned of incoming rockets from Gaza. Terrorists launched a salvo of 45 rockets at major Israeli cities, reaching as far as the coastal town of Hadera, north of Tel Aviv. That's about 70 miles from Gaza, further north than ever before. The missile was the same kind that Israel intercepted early this year on a shipment from Iran to the Gaza Strip. 17 of the missiles fired overnight were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile defense. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said no other country would endure such a barrage of rockets. He said in recent days, Hamas terrorists have fired hundreds of rockets at Israel civilians. No other country lives under such a threat, and no country would accept such a threat. Israel will not tolerate the firing of rockets on our cities and towns. Israel said it tried to negotiate a ceasefire.
We tried to de-escalate. Messages were sent. We told Hamas to stop this rocket fire, but they continued. And now we are acting. The Israeli Defense Forces are acting to bring about a situation where the people of Israel no longer have to live in fear.
Meanwhile, the government authorized the IDF to call up as many as 40,000 reserve soldiers if needed. A smaller amount have already been called up as Israel mulls a ground invasion into Gaza.
You know, a few years ago when another war was going on, I was over there and I drove down from the north part of Israel along the coast to some areas down in that area, down there, and I was so struck with how vulnerable Israel is. It's so narrow, it's so easy to destroy. I went by power plants and things like that that could be easily hit by rocket fire. And now their major city, Tel Aviv, has had a rocket fired at it, and so has Jerusalem. And so they're striking at the heart of Israel. Israel is very, very vulnerable. And except for the grace of God, they couldn't sustain themselves. But they're going to, and now they're striking back. And I hope the nations of the world will realize that they were not the aggressor in this thing. They were attacked by a terrorist group, Hamas, which is now linked up with the Palestinian Authority. And somebody says, well, let's have a two-state solution. I want you to negotiate a state with Hamas as a Palestinian state. The Israelis are just not going to do it. Now, there's something here at home. There's a strain of tuberculosis which is impervious to all the modern medical array. You know, you've got penicillin and all the rest of it, but these are resistant to everything we have as far as we know. They found one case of that, they claim, but we have a report from somebody on Fox News who says that there are many, many cases, and these kids coming across, they're crawling with lice. They have lice actually coming down their faces, and these diseases are there, and they can spread quickly into the population of America. Well, the politics over immigration are coming to a head as the president now goes to Texas. Is this going to be another Katrina moment where George Bush flew over and looked down out of from 30,000 feet? The president didn't go into the border. He doesn't want to be embalmed. John Jessup has that story from Washington. Here's John.
Pat, President Obama's visit to Texas comes as tensions mount across the country over the growing crisis at the border and concerns about what to do with the flood of immigrants pouring into the U.S. Ephraim Graham has the story.
The president won't go to the border, but he is meeting with Texas Governor Rick Perry, as well as faith leaders and other Texas officials, to discuss the immigration crisis. Perry, a possible presidential candidate in 2016, has blasted the White House in recent days, saying it has failed to respond to his warnings about the flood of immigrant children.
This is a failure of diplomacy. It is a failure of leadership from the administration in Washington, D.C.
The administration also has to contend right now with backlash from communities that want no part in temporarily housing immigrant children.
We have to stand up and fight.
In Marietta, California, protesters stood outside a Border Patrol facility Tuesday and spoke out against processing immigrants there.
We just want the uncontrolled, unchecked illegal immigration to be controlled.
Last week, a group of protesters in Marietta forced a bus carrying immigrants to turn around. In League City, Texas, the city council received applause after it passed a resolution forbidding the federal government from housing immigrant children in the city.
Fears is that we'll get 1,000 kids here in League City. Where are they going to be housed? I think our school system will be required to educate them.
In other communities like this one outside a naval base in California, the views are more mixed, especially after a tour of a facility currently housing immigrant children.
When I saw these kids, I saw myself. When I saw these kids and they were smiling, I knew that they're scared and that they're alone. And as a parent, sometimes you have to make difficult decisions.
Congress now has a difficult decision to make: how much to spend to secure the border and care for the children who've already crossed. And there's already worries about the tight quarters they're in and reported cases of tuberculosis, which can spread through close contact. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Pat, back to you.
You know, Katrina was a terrible disaster. We at Operation Blessing were working very hard shortly after that thing hit. I was there in New Orleans and others of our people, and we stayed there for months on end. That was a natural disaster that was brought about by the operation of a hurricane. This thing in Texas and along the border was brought about by the operation of one man whose name is Barack Obama. He's the one that sent the signal that these folks could come across the border and stay here. He made it quite clear that we were not going to enforce our border policies, and the next thing you know, we've got this flood of children. This is not sent by God. It is visited on us by a person who has got a political agenda that we can't fully understand. But it is a crisis. It's something that, and for some reason, the president could say, stop it, but he won't do it. He won't stop this thing. It could be stopped, but he won't do it because they know. These immigrants know that once they get their kids across the border, we're going to look after them. And we're compassionate people. We don't want little kids starving and diseased and so forth. But we cannot accept this kind of treatment. But it was the result of the president. Well, Texas health officials say they have confirmed 3 cases of tuberculosis at the border with Mexico. But Todd Starnes of Fox News says anonymous sources are telling him that the government is coming up with what they believe is a very serious health threat. One health care provider told him, quote, "The amount of tuberculosis is astonishing." Now remember, these are diseases, this particular strain, that is impervious to penicillin and other of our most modern drugs. And if this thing gets into the population of America, it can spread like wildfire, and people who get it die. We're talking about a health risk of massive, massive proportions. John?
A top official at Veterans Affairs has apologized to employees who suffered retaliation after they complained about problems with health care at the VA, including poor patient care, long wait times, and other difficulties. The harassment complaints were revealed at a hearing Tuesday night at the House Veterans Affairs Committee. The official apologized after 4 VA employees described how the department tried to limit criticism and punish whistleblowers. A watchdog agency says 67 of those employees filed complaints that they were harassed by supervisors. The complaints were filed in 28 states at 45 separate facilities. Well, in the last year, the federal government sent out at least $100 billion in payments to people who should not have received them. And congressional investigators say that figure could climb higher. Medicare programs account for half of the mismanaged money, but there were also tax credits given to families that didn't qualify, unemployment benefits given to people who had jobs, and medical payments made for unnecessary medical treatments. Florida Republican Congressman John Mica says nobody knows exactly how much taxpayer money is wasted through improper payments, But by the federal government's own astounding estimate, that is more than $500 billion over the past 5 years. Pat, talk about wasteful spending.
John, I am appalled. Ladies and gentlemen, we all should be. You look at that clock. They've got an advertisement now for gold and silver where they show that clock, and it's going all the time, billions and billions and billions. It's now $17.5 trillion, and we say, how will we ever pay it off? How will we ever pay it off? Well, we will. It's a great economy and a great country, but we've got to stop the bleeding. If you get a patient that comes into the emergency room, the first thing you do is stop the bleeding, and then you try to get him healthy. But we won't stop the bleeding. Who ever heard of $500 billion wasted, just thrown away? These are the folks that want to take over 1/6 of the economy and run the health care program. You see what they've done in the Veterans Administration, and the awful thing is that these bureaucrats along the way don't want anybody to criticize them. If somebody raises a voice against them, that person is punished, fired, put on suspended leave, whatever they do to them. And the ones that are performing badly wind up getting bonuses. It's a horrible mess. And why don't the American people complain? Well, they get a paycheck. They get money coming in from the feds, and they think, well, if I get mine, who cares what's happened to the rest of it? It's time we realize, folks, our future is at stake. The future of our children is at stake. And we've got to do something to stop this horrible fiscal bleeding. I wrote a book about an asteroid hitting us. And I think one of these days that's what's going to happen. But I tell you, right now, if you want to ask me what is going to happen bad in the economy coming up, it is the economic collapse that will be brought about by this excessive debt. Sooner or later, we won't pay the bills. Sooner or later, we will default. Sooner or later, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Saudis, whoever will stop extending us credit. And this country will be in a severe depression. People will be out of work. People will be suffering. And it'll be brought about because we haven't managed our fiscal policies. And it's really serious. It is and it's getting much, much worse. But $500 billion thrown away to people who didn't deserve it. John?
Pat, severe obesity can cut lives short by up to 14 years. A new review of 20 earlier studies found that people who were considered severely obese can die much earlier due to increased risks of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. Only about 6% of adults in the U.S. are severely obese as of now, but that number is rapidly growing. And Pat, if that doesn't motivate people to get moving, I'm not sure what will.
14 years off your life for being obese. That's a big chunk of time.
Well, maybe people want to leave early. They want to go to be with the Lord. I want to go be with the Lord. I'm fighting it because I
think people want quality of life. I think they just get in these habits that they can't break.
I checked my blood pressure today. It is so moderate and low. I mean, it's just something I think, come on.
You are the picture of health.
I'm the picture of health. I really am. I was working out yesterday. You work out all the time, though, don't you?
I do. I walk a lot. I was on vacation. I swam a lot, did some hiking and walking. I was in Roatan, Honduras, like a little island off of Honduras.
How was that?
It was amazing. Very chill island is the way to describe it. Just very relaxed. It's off season right now, so great for. Well, the Hondurans say it's a great place for the gringos to come to visit. But I was on a golf course, and the exciting thing about the golf course, well, the ocean and the golf course, was there were crocodiles in the ponds in the golf course, and we were out walking, and then you see these signs, beware of the crocodiles. So we didn't see any.
Oh, man. Well, don't come back with a leg chopped off for some evil croc.
The House of Representatives has approved a 5-year renewal of the Commission on International Religious Freedom. The independent bipartisan commission reports on violations of religious rights abroad and recommends actions the U.S. could take against countries that persecute or fail to prevent persecution of people of faith. The renewal is still awaiting approval in the Senate. India's Supreme Court has ruled that Islamic courts in their country have no legal authority and people are not bound by any of their decrees. According to the ruling, Muslims may choose to abide by Sharia law if they wish, but people cannot be legally forced to do so. India is a predominantly Hindu country with a large Muslim minority. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.